All right, welcome back to Learning with Merit. Today we're going to talk about for loops and one-dimensional lists. First things first, we need to review our lists knowledge. So here we have a name for a list, and here is the list. It is the entire alphabet, okay, A through Z. Each one of these things in the list is called an element, so each letter is an element of the list, and each element has a number associated with it called an index. Now the indexes start at 0, and they increase by 1, okay, as we go to the right in our list. So A would have the index 0, B would have the index 1, C would have the index 2. If I wanted to get the letter D, for example, I would say list 1D, and then I would provide the index in square brackets. So I'd say list 1D, and then the number 3, and that would bring back D, because that's what's stored at that spot in the list. Now, the length of this list is important for us to keep in mind. There are 26 letters in the alphabet, so we know the length is 26. However, the last index is 25 right there, and that is because the last index is always one less than the length, because when we figure out the length, we start at 1, but indexes start at 0. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, here are a couple other things we need to keep in mind. To access an element, so each of these letters, we need to use the list name and then in square brackets the index that we want. And we're also going to be using the range function today. And the range function needs a start, a stop, and a step value. And we need to keep in mind that the stop value is not included. It does include the start, but it does not include the step. It's going to go right up to right before that stop. So for example, if I put the number 25 here at stop, it would only go to 24. Okay. So for our list, we would need to use 26 to get to the last element, which would be 25. And that last index would be 25, stores the last element, which would be Z. Okay. Now I need to keep that in mind also if we're going down. If I started all the way at 25 and I wanted to go down all the way to 0, I would need my stop to be -1, because if it's -1, then I will be able to actually get to the number 0. So let's talk about using the actual for loops now. So here, let's come down to our next few lines. And let's talk about looping forward and printing indexes with a one-dimensional list. So this is pretty simple. So to loop forward and print indexes, we're going to say for index, that is our variable we are creating. You'll notice I didn't create it beforehand because when I create it here, it's going to get values from the range function over here, and then we're going to print those values. So in range, we need our start, our stop, and our step. Start's pretty easy. When we're going forward, it's going to be 0 every time. Step, pretty much either going to be going up by 1 or going down by 1. In this case, we're going up, so it's a +1. Stop is where things may change a little bit. So our stop here is the length of list 1D. Now we know the length of the alphabet. I've got the whole alphabet in this list. That means the length is 26. Since the length is 26 and we go right up to before 26, which would be 25, this works. It goes from 0 to the number 25, and that is all of our indexes in that list. So now if I ask it to print it out, it goes 0 to 25, and that is all of our indexes. Now if I want this to be the elements, if I want to print out all of the elements, then what I need to do is change one thing. You'll notice I just changed this. Everything else is still the same. The only thing I changed was instead, just like I mentioned up here, you want to use list 1D and then the index variable inside of the brackets here, so that instead of 0 through 25 now, we're going to see each of the items at those index values. So now I'm going to go hit play, and it doesn't like that for some reason. All right, let's hit it again. There we go. All right, so just had a little glitch that time. So instead of seeing the number 0 there, we see A this time. That's because we're printing the elements. And instead of seeing 25 at the end, we see Z this time because, again, we are printing the elements. Now, let's say that we didn't want to loop forward. We wanted to loop backwards. Things are going to change just a little bit this time. So if we're going to loop backward and print out the indexes, we're going to see something like this. So we still have 4 index, okay, and now we're still printing index, but our range changes a little bit. Our start is going to be the length of the list minus 1. The length of the list is 26. So we subtract 1, we get 25. So we start at the very last index. Remember, this is 25, that's our last index. So then, where do we want to stop? We want to stop at 0, because that's the very beginning. But instead of putting 0 here, I have to put -1, or -1, so that it can go all the way up to 0 and actually include it this time. And then since I'm stepping down, I also want a -1 there. So now this time I clear my output and I hit run, and I gotta give it a second. Helps if I save it. There we go. So now we see 25 and it counts down. So it goes from 25 all the way to 0. Okay, so that would end up being 25. This allows us to go to 0, and that's letting us go down. Now, what if we wanted to print the elements? Literally, very little is going to change. You'll see the same thing. Here we go. This time, I changed just that. That's all I had to change to print the elements. So instead of us printing out these numbers, we should see a Z right there for 25. We should see an A right there for 0. So I'll clear the output, I'll hit run, and look at that. We have Z and we have A. And again, I didn't change anything else to loop backwards. We started at the last index, so that's 26 minus 1. That gives us the index 25. This allows us to go all the way to 0. And then this one makes sure that we are going down. Remember, it is start, stop, step, just like that. All right, now, maybe we don't just want to go backwards. Maybe we have some specific reason we need to do something like going beginning to the middle. So we don't want to go through the whole list. We just want to go to the middle of the list. So beginning to middle, and we're going to print indexes. So this time we have to do something a little bit different. We're going to have to include some math. So again, we still have our index variable. We're still going to print out that index variable. And in our range function, that's the only thing that's really changing. So we start at 0. That's the beginning. The beginning is 0. Okay, and what is, just for giggles here, let's look. I'm going to type out Python. What is 26 divided by 2? Well, that gives us the number 13. All right, so the number 13. And just to make sure that this is an integer, okay, because I want to make sure this works for everything. This is actually a float. You notice how there's a decimal there? So that's a float number. I want to make sure it's an integer because every one of my indexes are integers. All right, so I want to make sure that I'm actually working with that. And then what you'll notice is even though this right here is going to bring back the number 13, half of 26 is 13, but the 13th index is actually 12. If you count from 0 to 12, you get 13 numbers. Okay? So the good part about this is because it goes right up to this number but doesn't include it, we only managed to make it from 0 to 12. So what you should see at the end of our index is the number 12. We're going to print 0 to 12 here. So go back to my output, make sure that everything is saved, and then I hit run. You'll see it goes from 0 to 12 because that is the 13th index. Now, what if we wanted to print out the elements? We've already talked about this. Hopefully you're starting to pick up on the fact that we're only changing one thing when we do this. And there you should see it again. I said list 1D and then index in brackets, and all of this is still the same. Okay, all of that is still the same. So if I save this and then run it after I clear my output, look at that. We see A through M. Now what's at the 12th index? The letter M. What's at the beginning index? A, and that's what we went through. So this allows us to go through half of the alphabet correctly. All right, we went through the first 13 pieces of the alphabet. So that's beginning to middle. What if I wanted to go from the middle to the beginning? So turn it around. It's not that hard to do. We're just going to change a couple things. So middle to beginning. So in this case, what we're going to do is we still have index. We're still printing out index. And our range is going to change just a little bit. So now we want to start at the middle. Okay, so what happens here is this right here. So I did 26 divided by 2. That's what this length does right here. So 26 divided by 2. That gives me the number 13. I want to make sure that's an integer. So now I get 13 without the decimal point. Then I subtract 1. That gives me the index 12. That's where I wanted to start at. I wanted to start at 12. Okay? Because I subtracted 1. Then I want to be able to go to 0. So I use this -1 so I can go down to 0. then I use the -1 here as my step so that I'm walking down backwards. So I'm going to go to 11, then to 10, then to 9, then to 8, all the way back to the beginning. So if I go back over here and we take a look at this, we should see M at the beginning. Actually, excuse me, we should see the indexes. So we should see 12 all the way to 0 going backwards. Make sure I saved it. There we go. And so now we have 12 all the way to 0. Okay, and that's what this right here is getting for us. It's dividing the whole list in whole length of the list by 2, and we get a number, then we subtract by 1, and that allows us to start at the middle of the list, and then we stop at 0, go down by 1s. What if we wanted to print the elements? We change literally one thing. They're almost identical. This time, again, all we did, list 1D, index, in square brackets, just like that. Everything else is still the same, and this goes from the middle to the beginning and prints the elements. So what we should see is M all the way back to A now. So I'll clear that, save, hit run, and there we go. We have M all the way back to A. Let's keep it going. So we've went middle to beginning. Okay. Now let's try middle to end. So we're going to change just a few things. A lot of things still stay the same, but we still have that index variable. We're printing out the index for the indexes here, except now our start and our stops are a little bit different. So this time our start is still the same because we want to start at the middle, but now our end is just the length of the list, right? Because we want to start in the middle of the list. Middle of the list is 12 here. Okay? And we want to go all the way to the end. All the way to 25. Just like this. Now, instead of subtracting 1 this time, you'll notice I have subtract 1 there. I'm going to get rid of that. And the reason is because I don't really want to start at 12. I want to start at 13 this time so that I go through the second half of the list. So this time I'm going to remove the -1, okay, and that allows me to go through the second half of the list starting right in the middle. Okay. So I'll clear this code, and we should see 13 through 25 this time. If I get it to run. All right, now if we click play, there we go. So we've got the middle, right, the second half, so that's 13 to 25. And if we count all that up, we should get 13 numbers, okay, because you got to include 13. So we should get 13 numbers there. That's the second half of our list from, and that should be N to Z whenever we print out the elements. So remember, this calculates the middle of the list for us. In this case, it's going to divide 26 by 2, and that's going to then be turned into an integer, which is a non-decimal number, a whole number. That should give us 13. Make sure everything is correct there. So we're going to be doing 13, and then the length of the list is 26, but we're going to go all the way up to right before 26, and that's going to be 25. So that'll be just perfect for us. So 13 to 25. So again, what if we wanted to do the elements this time, middle to end? Hopefully, as I said before, you're starting to pick up on this. Literally one thing is going to change. That's it. So you got to get a look at it. Now watch it change. Just one thing changed. That's it. Okay. This time I'm saying list 1D because I want to go to this list, and then the element that I want, okay, I'm giving the index of that element, and it's going to change as we go through the list, okay, and it's going to start in the middle at 13 and then go all the way to 25. So we should see N through Z this time. N through Z. Let's do that, clear our output, and we see N through Z, just like we want, and that's the middle of the alphabet all the way to the end. Okay, what about the end to the middle this time? See, showing you all the different ways that we can do this. So the end to the middle. End to the middle. So let's see what changed. We still have index. We're printing out the indexes. So we still have the index there. But this time, what's our end number? Okay, our end number. Well, if we want to start all the way at the end, we need the length of the list, and then we need to subtract 1 from it. Right? So we need the length of the list, and then we need to subtract 1 from it. And then that allows us to start at 25. So length of the list is 26. We subtract 1, we get 25. Then where do we want to stop? Well, we want to stop in the middle. Okay, we want to stop in the middle. But remember, when we're going down, we actually need to be 1 less than where we want to go to. So if I take 26 and divide by 2, I get 13. I want to subtract 1 so that I'm at 12. So I go from Z all the way to end, or from 25 all the way to 13 in this case. And then I want to make sure that I'm subtracting 1 every time so that I'm actually going down correctly. So let's see what this outputs for us. Let's save everything. Whoops. Save everything. And let's output. So there we go. We've got 25 all the way down through 13. So what if we wanted to print out the elements? Seems like I've said that a lot. Well, keep a close eye, because only one thing's going to change, just like it has every single time we've done this. Okay, so we're still here. Okay, we're going from the end. Let me fix that real quick. We're going from the end, which is the length of the list minus 1. So 26 minus 1 gives us the last index. That's 25. So we're going to start at 25. Then here we have, okay, the length of the list minus 1. So we're going to end. That's our number that this gets. So it does 26 divided by 2. That's 13 minus 1 gives us 12. All right, we want to make it all the way to this 13 number counting down, and that's what we did with our indexes. So now we should see Z through N. Z through N. So let's save that and hit run a couple times while it has trouble. See if we can get it. Let's try one more time. There we go. All right, so make sure, remember, because everybody makes mistakes, remember that you got to be subtracting 1 there. You're going down by 1 when you're going from the end to the middle. You're going down, so you want to make sure that you actually put that correctly there. So now we've got Z through N, and that goes from the end to the middle of the alphabet for us. Okay, into the middle. Now, there's only one more thing we've got to look at here with lists, and this is a shorthand. Because there's a very common thing we do with lists. We go through the list from the beginning to the end, and we print out the elements. So there's actually a shorthand for this, and it's very useful, okay? But it's not as useful as being able to control every aspect of it, like I've shown you with the range function. But it is a great shorthand because this is something you're going to probably do a lot when you're dealing with lists. So here's what we have changed. Instead of index, and I could use index, but it wouldn't make any sense in this case. I used element, and there's a good reason for that. Whenever I use element here, element represents each element in the list as we go through it. And what list does it represent the elements in? List 1D. So we give it a variable to represent each element, we give it the list to go through, and then we say print each element. Okay. So now that I've done this, you'll see that it's went through the entire list and printed out all of the elements from A to Z. Now the problem is, and here's why you don't want to get in the habit of using this unless you know, okay, what you're doing, is that this is the only way this works. You can only do it this way. And it's a great shorthand because we quite often do this. But this will only work, and it is called a for each loop. It only works whenever you're trying to go forward through the list and print out all of the elements. Okay. So this should be a pretty good introduction to using for loops with one-dimensional lists. We went from the entire through the list, we went all the way through the list forward, all the way through the list backward. Okay. We printed the elements. We've printed the indexes. We went from the beginning to the middle. We went from the middle to the beginning, the middle to the end to the middle. Okay? And then we discussed the for each loop. And now remember, okay, it's all about the start, the stop, the step. Okay, where do you want to go? Where do you want to end up? Okay, and all of those should be extremely helpful to you. All right, thank you for watching.